Today's date is February 4th, 2024. This is the Israeli-Palestinian federal government simulation. Today's simulation is with Professors Isaac Nevo and Lior Sternfeld. Hello, everyone. We are proposing a federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine, a government that will be independent and separate from the Israeli government or the Palestinian government. An independent government for the people in Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem. Over 14 million people, based on a constitution, based on a common parliament, equal to the Palestinians and the Israelis, with a president and vice president, one Palestinians and one Israeli, rotating in 2 years, within 2 years. Based on the constitution, you could go to the IP Confederation website and read the constitution, which discusses the manner in which the common government will be created, how it will function, and what will be the relationship between the existing government and the federal government that we are proposing. We think that it is the best way to make peace. We are not proposing the dismantlement of the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. If those governments exist, they will exist with the Palestinian Israeli federal government. But we believe that a legitimate government for the whole area is necessary. There is no single legitimate government in the area of Israel and Palestine, because the Israelis and the Palestinians have never voted for a democratic government together. The Israeli government controls the area of Israel, the West Bank and Gaza, but it's not elected by the people of Israel, the West Bank and Gaza. The Palestinian governments have not been elected recently, but even when they were not elected by the Israeli people. We are proposing a legitimate democratic government based on a constitution with separation between religion and government for the whole area of Israel, Palestine. My name is Joseph Avasar. You could reach me at josephavassar@gmail.com. Today's guests are, first guest is Professor Lior Sternfeld. Well, actually, they will both give us their opinions about our proposal at the same time. Professor Lior Sternfeld is the William and Charlotte K. Duddy University Endowed Fellow in the Humanitarians and an Associate Professor of History and Jewish Studies at Penn State University. He's also the Templeton Fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. He's the author of the book, Between Iran and Zion, Jewish Histories of 20th Century Iran. He's also the co-author of Jews of Iran, Photographic Chronicle. Additionally, Lior Sternfeld is the founding associate editor of the Palestine-Israel Review, a publication that seeks to change the way Palestinians and Israelis are traditionally studied. Today's Professor guest is Isaac Nevo. Professor Isaac Nevo taught philosophy at Ben Gurion University of the Negev, focusing on analytic philosophy, ethics, and political philosophy. He's the author of the book, The Dueling of the Razor's Edge, Analytic Philosophy and Its Development, and has written other publications on various philosophical topics. In addition to his academic work, Professor Isaac Nevo has been involved in various public and political initiatives. He has been associated with organizations such as SIAH, Israeli New Left, Negev Coexistence, Forum and Academia for Equality. He's also shown support for groups like Yesh Gvul, There is a Limit, Shovrim Shtika, Breaking the Silence, Peace Now, and others. Professor Isaac Nevo advocates for the two-state solution. I met with both of these gentlemen before today's simulation, and I think they are aware of our proposal for a federal government, and they also suggested legislation that they wish to discuss in today's simulation. Our next, our next speaker on February 18 will be Professor Ofer Ashkenazi from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He is a professor of history. After that, we will have Professor James L. Gelvin on March 3rd. He is a UCLA Scholar of Middle Eastern History. And on March 17, 2024, this year, we will have attorney Ahab Masala, who is a civil rights attorney in Palestine and Israel, dealing a lot with reunification of families in Israel, Palestine, Jews, non-Jews, Israelis, and Palestinians who are facing reunification issues with the existing authorities there. We will have Professor David Mendikoff on March 31st, 2024. He's a professor of Middle Eastern Studies and Public Policy at University of Massachusetts Amherst. On April 14, we will have Ziad Abu Ziad. He's a member of the Palestinian National Council, the Parliament of the PLO. He's a former Palestinian Authority Minister and a member of the Palestinian Legislative Council, chair of the Law Committee, former member of the bilateral negotiations team in post-Oslo Accord, Cairo negotiations, which led to the creation of the Palestinian Authority. On April 28, we will have Tony Klug. He's a special advisor on the Middle East to the Oxford Research Group and serves as a consultant to the Palestine Strategy Group and the Israel Strategic Forum. Sorry. On May 12th, we will have Professor Michael Steinberg. He's a professor of history and professor of music and German studies at Brown University. We had many participants in many simulations before. This is a list of the people who are participated. Many support our proposal for a federal government. Many do not. We invite people to express their opinion. We don't expect them to agree or not agree, but we ask tough questions during the simulation. Noam Chomsky appeared in our simulations twice. He supports our formula for peace, and he endorsed it by recording a video, especially endorsing our formula for peace. I believe that's the only endorsement from Noam Chomsky to any peace proposal on Israel-Palestine. Unfortunately, some people either did not respond to us or refused to come for one reason or another. But we are contacting them as much as possible because a lot of times the reality changes and they or their schedules changes or whatever, and they do agree after we send several requests. But hopefully these people will also participate in our future simulations. It takes 120 minutes for the simulations. We have several segments in today's simulation, and then we will have conversation with the speakers and audience question and answers and closing remarks. There is a short video that explains the IPC formula for peace. It's 2 minutes. I'd like to play that for you.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations. And instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, a common third government between the Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically designed to foster peace, tolerance, and economic prosperity between the two nations. Here's how it works. First off, both Israel and Palestine will keep their respective governments. Israel's Knesset and the Palestinian National Authority will remain unchanged. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, IPC, will be a third entity acting as a unifying agent between the two. The IPC will comprise 300 parliament members elected from 300 districts in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Above them will preside a president and vice president, one Israeli and one Palestinian. In order for the IPC to pass a law, it will require a 55% majority from its Israeli representatives, as well as a 55% majority from its Palestinian representatives, thereby preventing either side from monopolizing the legislature. Of course, the IPC won't undermine the political power of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. At any time, Israel or Palestine may veto a law passed by the IPC. If neither side vetoes, the law is passed. And the two nations are another step closer to resolution. Please help us make this a reality. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We might speak different languages, but we all mean the same thing.
So we are going to simulate what we just saw on the video. And before we actually simulate, I'd like to conduct a pre-simulation survey, and we will compare it to the post-simulation. In other words, we'll conduct two surveys. Right now, do you support a common federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine? Please vote.
The voting thing disappeared.
Dan, you need to put the proper voting.
I think that was the wrong one.
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
Dan, can you put the yes. Do you support a common government for Israel and Palestine? I'll give it another 1 minute for you to vote. Okay, can you publish the vote? 28 out of 29 said yes. That's 97%. And one person out of 29 said no. That's 3%. Hopefully that one person will change his mind when we conduct the simulation at the end. Our purpose is to show how a common federal government would make peace. And peace is the only game in town. Peace is the only goal. There is no other goal. Peace gives security, safety to the people of Israel and Palestine. So there is no other goal other than peace. At the end of the day, we will have peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. The speakers are not representative of the IPC. They were invited to stress test the IPC and tell us what they think is good about it or wrong about it, but they're not representatives. We follow our own narrative. In other words, we are not pro-Palestinian or Israeli. We believe that a federal government will have its own narrative. It would look to support and protect and give peace to the people of Israel, Palestine, 14 million people. And therefore it will have its own perspective, its own narrative, not the Israeli narrative or the Palestinian narrative. It will have its own perspective for the people of Israel and Palestine together. We will have a rigorous discussion. I met with these two gentlemen before. We have some disagreements, but we're very polite, and I would like to have the conversation as polite as possible, but as meaningful as possible. We do not preclude other formulas for peace. In fact, we encourage other formulas for peace. We think that our formula is the best, but we are not claiming exclusivity. We will ask these two individuals, two professors, and all of you, the audience, please judge us on these criteria. Could the IPC make peace? Is the formula we are suggesting attainable? And we ask you to be fair and judge us based on what's the alternative, not based on perfection. We know it's not perfect. You cannot ever come up with any perfect plan on anything, especially not on Israel and Palestine. We will show how a common federal government could pass legislation that neither the Israeli nor the Palestinian government will be able to veto. We give them a veto power if we violate their sovereignty. But we believe that there are many legislations that could pass, and the Israeli and the Palestinian governments will not be able to veto because they will lose legitimacy within their own people. We have many legislations that we can show that demonstrate that the Israeli and the Palestinian governments would not be able to veto. We cannot show you all of the legislations because we are limited by time, but we have done so in the many legislations, many simulations that we had in the past. We ask you to look at the big pictures, avoid technical arguments. We are limited by time. We're asking you, just look at the big picture. In the simulation, this is a simulation, it's not a speech. So we ask you to refrain from comments during the time of the simulations. However, we encourage questions. There is a difference between a question and a comment. And because this is a simulation, we want you to respect what we are trying to do, which is to show you in a simulated manner how a common government will exist and how it will make peace in conjunction with the existing governments. So if I show you an airplane and you say, Joseph, how does this plane fly? That's a question. We encourage questions. But if you say, well, airplanes cause pollution and I don't like airplanes or I don't want to fly, that's a comment. Please keep your comments and write them in the chat or keep them to the end. But This is the heart of the simulation. This is what we need to pay attention to in order to understand what this simulation is about. And I spent a lot of time, especially with Professor Isaac Nevo, over these assumptions that are at the heart of the simulation. We want you to assume that we were able to have $100 million spent for a year-long campaign promoting the election. So we want you to assume that we have an election, that we had an election actually that in the past, that the elections were concluded today. And we were able to spend $100 million explaining to the people of Israel and Palestine and the people of the world, what does it mean to have a federal government in Israel, Palestine? What is the benefits of that? And answer all their questions and hopefully promote a discussion. $100 million is a lot of money to do that. And we want you to assume that we had that money and we spend it on advertising campaign to explain to the people of Israel and Palestine, what does it mean to have a federal government, and to recruit parliament members and to recruit or candidates for parliament and to recruit candidates for president and vice president. We also want you to assume that the election allowed 14 million people, with the exclusion of minors, of course. We allowed them to vote. That means in the area of Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem. They're all permitted to vote as long as they are citizens of the area, citizens of Israel or Palestine, and residents. We also want you to assume that 5 million people actually voted in the election. The 3 million Palestinians voted and 2 million Israeli voted in the election. We want you to assume that the president received 1.5 million votes. For the purpose of these assumptions and for the purpose of helping me run this simulation, I want you to assume that I was elected president. I'm going to be acting. I'm going to be pretending to be the president. Now, so that it's clear, first of all, I never intend to run as to be president, and I'm not even qualified under the Constitution because I do not reside in Israel, Palestine. But I want you to assume that I was elected. So I'm going to play that role during the simulation. And I'm going to play the role that I was elected by 1.5 million people. I want you to assume also that 300 parliament members in 300 districts were elected. And each parliament member represents 47,000 people. So I'm going to go to the audience first before I go to our speakers. Do people in the audience have any questions about these assumptions? Do you have any questions regarding these assumptions? This is the heart of what, okay, Ingeborg, could you please ask your question? Ingeborg.
She's muted.
Ingeborg.
Oh, excuse me. Okay, my question is, it's very clear who is allowed to vote, the ones with citizenship. What is with the ones with the refugees who have citizenship but had to flee? Are they allowed to vote?
The only people that can vote for the federal government are the people that are citizens of Israel or Palestine and resident of either Israel or Palestine. We are not a Palestinian government. We are not an Israeli government. We are a federal government for the area of Israel and Palestine.
Okay, I understand. I like your project. Thank you for explaining me.
Thank you. Okay, I see 3 other people raise their hand. Sumava, Please ask your question.
Yeah, hi. So my question is, are we, I mean, considering the people in West Bank and Gaza as well in this voting procedure, or is it not? Or is, I mean, my question is, are we considering these two regions as well, and the people in the electorate, I mean, voting process?
Yeah, in order to vote, yes, 14 million people were given the opportunity to vote. In the area includes West Bank, Gaza, Israel, and Jerusalem. Nasir, what is your question?
My yes, my question is about the when you say residents, so these are non-citizens. So residents meaning like the ones who live, like Palestinians who live in Jerusalem who don't have Israeli citizenship, or residents like anybody who came and maybe is married to an Israeli citizen, just has a residency?
You have to be a citizen of Israel or Palestine, and you have to have lived there for a period
residency,
of
you
6
mean,
months.
okay, because when you said resident, I thought you meant status, like their status as far as.
It's resident means you have lived there for a period of 6 months.
All right.
Paula, please ask your question. Paula Reeder.
You need to
Okay.
unmute.
Oh, Una, both Una and Paula are, okay, Una, please ask your question.
Okay, what about the settlers who are still arriving in Israel, who are automatically Israelite? What about those people? Are you going to count them, or?
If they meet the criteria of being either Israeli or Palestinian citizens, and they have resided in the area for 6 months, it doesn't matter who you are. These two criteria are the only criteria. So they will be allowed to vote, whether they are settlers or whatever. They will be allowed to vote if they are citizens of either Israel or Palestine and have resided in the area for 6 months. Paula, please.
Yes, I have 3 questions. Your election assumes there are 14 million eligible voters. Is that correct?
No, 14 million people, 4 million of them we are assuming are minors. They are not allowed to vote. 10 million are eligible voters.
All right, and of that, you're assuming half voted.
Correct.
A majority of which are Palestinians, correct?
Correct.
If only half of the people voted and the majority were Palestinians, how can you assume that a majority of people will accept the results of the voting?
That's not part of the assumption. That's part of the political discussion, whether half of the population who voted, for example, in the United States, less than half of the population actually vote. And then the question is a political question. Does it have enough political legitimacy?
Well, that's my question, really. Does it have political legitimacy given the circumstances between Palestine and Israel?
In my opinion, it does. You may have a different opinion.
Okay.
That's a political question. It's not part of the assumptions. Okay, any other, you said you have 3 questions. All right. Let's go to our guest today, Professor Isaac Nevo. Do you have any questions or comments? You're allowed to make comments as well regarding these assumptions.
Oh, what a privilege. Look, I have a question. And the question is, I have a number of questions. The first question is, by what legal authority those elections, those parliamentary elections, were conducted? Parliamentary elections are, in the normal run of things, part of an institutional framework which is encoded in law, And so I'm uncertain what authorizes those elections, and consequently, the worry is that the parliament elected will be really a parliament in name only, without legislative authority recognized by the institutions of or the peoples of either sides, the Israeli state and the Palestinian Authority. These are my questions. What legal authority and what legislative authority do these elections and parliament have?
Well, anytime you create a new democratic government, it is always created by a private organization, private individuals who conduct the election. And then once the elections are conducted and once there is enough voters, then the legal authority is retroactive. They create the legal authority. This is how the government of Israel was created, by retroactive legal authority. It was it conducted the election on February, I believe, 1949, and then it received its legitimacy from the people.
Can I add a comment?
Yeah, sure.
The worry is that you introduce this system as if de novo, right, by the vote itself, and authorize it retroactively. But this is proposed in disregard of the existing institutions, and it doesn't seek their approval.
Correct.
So you don't seek the approval of either the Israeli Knesset or the Palestinian Authority, whom you really, you don't seek entirely to replace them, but you certainly seek to modify their authority in a way that intervenes with their sovereignty. The Palestinians do not enjoy sovereignty, and that's a large part of our problem. But the Palestinian Authority is an institution that has international recognition and has fought very hard to come into existence. And you propose here a parliamentary election based on a constitution that has not received neither the authorization nor the approval of either of these existing institutions. And so underlying those assumptions is a highly revolutionary proposal. It's a proposal to subordinate both the Knesset and the Palestinian Authority to the retroactive, as you call it, authority of the parliament hereby elected. And that's that's a move that could engender opposition.
Well, I don't disagree with you that the Israeli and the Palestinian government may oppose this. However, you must keep in mind there are not legitimate governments in the area of Israel and Palestine. They do not have any legitimacy or legal authority to prevent this election, and they do not have the moral authority because they've never been able to give peace. They actually gave a lot of death and destruction to the people of Israel and Palestine. And we are considering here creating a federal government for the entire area of Israel and Palestine, but we are not undermining the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. In fact, we give them a veto power over legislation that violates their sovereignty. Let's go to Professor Lior Sternfeld.
I just want to, yeah, do you hear me? I just want to add some one comment to provide context to your explanation to Isaac, is that the 1949 elections were conducted after the UN, after the Israeli establishment already secured the support of the UN, and therefore already had international agreement to conducting these elections and recognizing the sovereignty of Israel. And this is something that right now the assumptions don't include any kind of international recognition prior to running the elections.
Correct, but we have one of our legislation is to actually seek UN recognition, so we could seek recognition after the election. Many countries that have been created sought recognition from the UN after they conducted the election. There's nothing new, so we don't have to duplicate what Israel has done. We can have our own path to recognition. Now, I saw two other hands, I think, but they disappeared. So, all right.
Ingeborg Kamp wanted to say something.
Okay,
Yes.
Ingeborg.
Yes, thank you. Would you, with these elections, expect that the present authorities would be elected? I mean, it doesn't matter, but maybe because the question was, do they have legitimate authority or disturb the sovereignty or whatever? I mean, the same politicians can offer themselves for elections.
Yeah, anybody
As
can.
the ones who are
Anybody
in
can.
power now.
Anybody can offer himself. However, under the Constitution, he or she will have to renounce their allegiance to any other government and to accept an allegiance to the new government that they are running. In other words, they cannot serve in two governments. They'll have to decide which government they want to pledge allegiance to, and they will have to renounce their allegiance to either the Israeli or the Palestinian government or any other government for that matter. So if it's someone from the United States of America or from Russia, he could run, but he will not be able to have both allegiance to two governments, because that would be a conflict of interest. That would violate the Constitution. Any other questions?
Thank you for the explanation. I think that's the problem between the US and Israel sometimes, because there are people in both governments.
Okay, we're trying to refrain from comments, just questions.
Yeah, okay.
All right, what are the, okay, Isaac, do you still have any questions?
Well, I have, I guess I want to record my disagreement with your assumption that the existing governments are illegitimate. I find that that's an assumption I don't agree with. So I just—
Well, that's not part of the assumption. That's my opinion.
That's, oh, okay, well, then let me disagree with that opinion.
Okay, well, I'm not sure on what ground, because the Israeli government controls the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem and is not elected by those people. So I'm not sure why you would say that they are legitimate in those areas, but that's not really part of the assumption.
No, I didn't say that I don't, actually, I do not think that the Israeli government is legitimate in those areas.
Okay.
And I think, in fact, it is not legitimate in those areas. It is an occupation that whose time has come. But that aside, I think your assumption or your opinion that the Israeli government is illegitimate in its own sphere, within its own borders, I disagree with that. And
Yeah, I didn't say within the 1967 border. Those are gone over 65 years ago. The government of Israel controls 5 million Palestinians without giving them the right to vote. They have to obey Israeli law. They have to obey Israeli Supreme Court decisions, and they are not allowed to vote. And therefore, in a democracy, it's the people who control, the people who owns the government. But the reason I say that the Israeli government is not legitimate is because it does not give the people the right to decide which their government is. All right, let's go to Shlomo. Shlomo, do you have a question?
Not exactly, just a quick answer to Isaac Nevo. Two things. First of all, Israel is not legitimate because it doesn't obey the international laws. And number two, Israel.
Okay, but that's a different discussion. We need
I know. I just wanted to compliment what you said.
All right, that will serve that to the comments. All right. I think we are clear about these assumptions. So now I'm going to be, because this is a simulation, I'm going to be asking for volunteers. I need 2 volunteers, first of all. The first volunteer will be the Prime Minister of Israel. Do I have a volunteer to act as the Prime Minister of Israel in this simulation? I need a volunteer to be the Prime Minister of Israel. Please.
If no one else wants to, I will.
Okay. Does anyone, Charles has been the Prime Minister of Israel many times. Is there anyone else who is willing to?
I can do it, but I've also been Prime Minister in the past, but if you.
Okay.
Whatever.
All right. Okay. So that's Giacomo?
Yes.
Okay. And what about the Palestinian president? Do I have a Palestinian president, a volunteer to be Palestinian president? Inger, okay, let me see. Ingeborg, are you willing to be the Palestinian president?
It would be my pleasure.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, the rest of you, I will ask you to act as either Israeli or Palestinian parliament member in the parliament. So you have to keep in mind that you are either Israeli or Palestinian parliament members, that you represent a district. Your district may be exclusively Palestinian or exclusively Israeli or a mixed district. In other words, what I'm trying to emphasize is in many of those districts, Palestinians and Israelis live together. A Palestinian would be able to vote for an Israeli could vote for a Palestinian. In an area that is exclusively Israeli, in all likelihood, we're going to get an Israeli parliament member. In an area that is exclusively Palestinian, in all likelihood, we'll get a Palestinian parliament member. So let's identify who we are as parliament members. And could you please now vote whether you are a Palestinian parliament member or an Israeli parliament member? Please keep in mind the area that you represent, because I may ask you during the simulation, are you an Israeli or Palestinian, and what district do you represent? Okay, 5 more seconds, 10 seconds.
Do I, as president, have to register as a parliament member too?
No,
because
you are,
in a way
you,
I'm
are,
a member.
you are in a different government. You are in the Ingeborg, you are only given the opportunity to veto. You are a different.
Okay, yeah, sorry. It's very logical. I didn't get it, sorry.
Okay, yeah, you are the president of the Palestinian people. and Giacomo is the Prime Minister of Israel. You are not allowed to vote in legislation because you are in a different government. Okay, so we have 18 Palestinian parliament members. Can you publish the result? And we have 7 Israeli parliament members. And this is how we're going to conduct the simulation. Now, I don't know if Isaac and Lior have already chose to be parliament members. It's up to you, or you can be observant. As I recall, that's what you chose to be when we met. So you do. All right. I'm not going to go over Isaac and Lior's objection because we went over that. First order of business is the Constitution. We are going to ratify the Constitution. And I'm going to be asking Libby, please read the Constitution, and then I'll ask you if you have questions, and then I'll ask our experts if they have questions. Libby, please read the Constitution.
We believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli governments, nor to abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. We recognize the need to work with the Israeli and Palestinian governments. Our purpose is to resolve conflicts and to expand the relationship between Palestinians in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, human rights for all. We voluntarily give the legislatures and the governments of Israel and Palestine veto power over legislation
we pass relating to the domain of control of those governments. Go ahead.
We believe in the separation of power between the legislative and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a permanent secular government for all the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having a separate judicial branch relating to IPC legislation and Israeli and Palestinian judges with a system to avoid biased decisions based on nationality.
Okay, so under the Constitution, the Israeli government and the Palestinian government are entitled to make any agreements between them. They can agree to a two-state, they can agree to one state, they can agree to anything else. Constitutionally, we, the federal government that was just elected, is prohibited from undermining those agreements. We have to accept those agreements between the Israeli and the Palestinian governments, and we will accept. Further, when we pass legislation that violates the sovereignty of those governments, we give them a veto power over the legislation. If they veto the legislation, then our legislation did not pass. But if they don't veto it, then it does pass and becomes the law of the land of Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem. Does anyone have in the audience, first, do you have any questions regarding the Constitution? Audience. That includes the parliament and the president and the prime minister. Do you have any questions? Okay, hearing no questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
My question is, you say when we vote, I'm not you, I won't vote, but when you vote for something, it becomes the law for part of the constitution of Israel and now occupied territories. Does this mean legally it becomes a law in, I mean, like an Israeli law which is valid now or something? Is it taken into the national jurisdiction, or is it something new?
It's new law that the federal, we are a new government, and we assert our jurisdiction, and it's a new law And once that new law passes, both the people in Israel and Palestine have to obey the law.
Okay, so it becomes like part of the now existing Israeli constitution and the Palestinian. I'm sorry, I don't know if they
Yeah,
have a
all right. I think I understand
constitution.
where you are asking. Just like the United States federal government has its own laws. There are federal laws. They're not the laws of each state must comply with those laws, and each state has its own laws. So if that makes it easier, we are the federal government for the whole area of Israel and Palestine, and the people of Israel and Palestine must comply with our laws because we passed them. We have legitimacy, and we are the people who are elected by the people of Israel and Palestine, and we pass the laws. Yes.
Okay,
Isaac.
thank you.
Well, I want to comment on that because the question was precisely regarding the legislative authority of the parliament. Are the laws that it passes or the constitution that it agrees upon, is it binding on the existing institutions, the Israeli state and the Palestinian Authority? And I think that's the very difficulty here. Your analogy with the American Constitution and the federal arrangements of America, of the United States of America, raises or brings up an ambiguity that I noticed in your presentation. Your video that you have shown us at the beginning speaks of the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. And now we're talking about a federation.
Correct.
These two kinds of institutions are very different. And the difference is this, that in a federation, the various states do not enjoy sovereignty. I don't know, California or Virginia are not sovereign states, although they're called states. Whereas in a confederation, the states within the confederation, like in the European Union, retain their sovereignty. And so the laws that are passed by the European Parliament are not the bylaws of France or Germany or whoever. And so this is a crucial difference. And the presentation sort of papered over it. But if we are talking about a confederation, as the video discussed, then the answer is no, that the laws passed by this parliament are not binding within either Israel or the Palestinian Authority. If it is a federation, then it is binding, but of course, it's binding on the basis of a constitution that has not been ratified or accepted or discussed within these decision-making communities. I guess I'll put it as a question.
All right, let me respond to you. I think I understand. First of all, the video was created several years ago. I agree with you. There is a discrepancy between how we now present ourselves as a federal government versus how the video or how we presented ourselves before as a confederation. I agree with you. It's because we have elevated our discussion, and it became clear to us that it's better to represent, to have a federal government over a confederation government. So it's a process, evolutionary process. Now, the gist of your argument is the existing Israeli and Palestinian government do they have to comply with the federal government if the federal government passes law that requires them to comply or contradict their laws? Is that what you're basically asking, correct?
Well, my question is, by what authority would it apply to them? Yeah.
Okay, so the authority is given to us by the people of Israel and Palestine. We believe we have more authority and we believe we have more legitimacy because we are elected by the people of Israel and Palestine. But furthermore, we are not claiming that they have to comply unless we give them a veto power and unless they choose not to veto. If they choose not to veto the legislation, that means they accept the legislation and therefore they will have to comply.
No.
Any other questions or questions from the audience? Or how about?
I have one.
Okay, go ahead.
So who is going to enforce the laws of the Confederation? Are you assuming that the Confederation will somehow be in control of the Israeli police and army, or that the Palestinians will have their own police and army to enforce?
We are going to enforce it, and we're going to pass. In fact, one of our next legislation, I believe.
But who is we? Who is we? Who's going to have
the federal? We were just elected by the people of Israel and Palestine. I am the president. I was elected by 1.5 million people. You, I assume, is either a parliament member. Are you a parliament member?
I'm a parliament member, and I'm wondering who controls the people who enforce the law.
You are a parliament member. I am the president. You pass legislation to require the executive branch to enforce the law. That's how it works in every constitution, in every democracy. All right, let's go to Lior. Do you have any comments?
I have a comment.
Lior is a professor. He's a speaker. He is allowed to make comments or questions.
Oh, okay.
I have a technical question. Candidates for the parliament, do they have to agree to certain, to commit themselves to, for example, not to undermine the Confederacy? So can they, for example, in the EU, there are anti-EU parties and representatives. Is this something that's possible in this model?
A parliament member must be a resident of his or her district, must be citizens of either Israel or Palestine, and must swear allegiance to the Constitution.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah,
Any other questions?
Joseph, but they also must ratify and accept the Constitution. Otherwise, they cannot be a parliament member.
Yeah, they swear allegiance to the Constitution. Yes.
Yeah. So if you're an anti-confederation or federationist, you cannot be, because if you don't ratify and accept it.
That's what. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's have the. Now we're going to ratify the Constitution right now, Palestinian and Israelis. If you do not ratify, you will be expelled. This is the Palestinian and Israeli parliament members. If you do not ratify, you're expelled from the parliament, because you have to accept the parliament in order to be a parliament member. So let's have the Palestinian parliament members first. Do you ratify the Constitution? Palestinian parliament members. Okay. So one published the results. One parliament member, 94% said yes. One parliament member voted no. That means that parliament member, a Palestinian parliament members who voted no is expelled from the parliament, and whoever got his second number of votes becomes the parliament members. So the parliament member who voted no is prohibited from voting on any legislation, and you are expelled from the parliament. Let's have the Israeli parliament members please vote. Okay, publish the vote. All the Israeli parliament members voted to ratify the Constitution. That means they accept the Constitution and they are all parliament members. So congratulations, we had an election, we have a Constitution, we have a president, we have parliament, the Constitution has been ratified, and now we can pass legislation, including what we can pass legislation, including on issues that Professor Nevo brought at the beginning is worldwide recognition or UN recognition. We can pass legislation requesting recognition, but we're going to be dealing with other legislation because of what the professor wanted in our meeting. Okay, let's go to another foundational legislation, and that's giving a veto power. Charles, could you please read this legislation about veto power?
Granting a veto power to the separate governments. The Confederation is the government of the entire population of Israel and Palestine, from the river to the sea. We recognize the Palestinian and Israeli governments and are seeking their cooperation to implement our vision of peace by giving them a veto. We will do our utmost to satisfy the essential needs of each government. We are pleading with the Palestinian and Israeli public to understand that while we would like to pass the best legislation possible to improve their lives, under these constraints, a perfect legislation is not possible. We hereby bestow a veto power relating to legislation affecting sovereignty to the following: the government of Israel on issues in which it is indispensable, the Palestinian government on issues in which it is indispensable. In the event of changes in governments, this legislation may be amended or repealed. The Parliament will decide on indispensability in each case. Vetoes may be bestowed individually or collectively.
All right. Audience member, do you have any questions regarding this legislation? This is not part of the Constitution. This is a legislation. Audience member. Okay, hearing no questions from the audience, I'm going to turn to our speakers. Professor Nevo, Isaac Nevo, do you have any questions or comments regarding this legislation?
I'm unclear about the reservation about the events of changes in government. What do you mean by that? And what do you mean by this legislation may be amended or repealed?
That means that if the Israeli government changes or the Palestinian government changes,
as they do regularly,
then we will, or if the events change as they do regularly, as reality changes as they do regularly, we are reserved the right to amend or repeal the veto power. In other words, let's say we gave a veto power to the government of Hamas, and now we realize that they don't really have the power. They are dispensable at this time. Let's say they are gone. They are dispensable, or they don't have sovereignty over physical areas that we are about to develop. Just because we gave them a veto power a year ago, that doesn't mean that they continue to have a veto power, and we reserve the right to amend or repeal because the government changed.
Look, this brings up another issue that it's part of reality, but I guess it hasn't come up in this simulation yet. Because you mentioned the government of Hamas. Now, the government of Hamas is separate from the Palestinian Authority.
Correct.
And of course, the whole problem here is that there is no Palestinian government equivalent to the Israeli government. And that's been our problem. Those of us who advocate for the two-state solution. But what this seems to me to suggest is that the veto power, so never mind that, perhaps this can be resolved. But what this item seems to suggest is that the veto power that is granted to the Israeli parliament and or the Israeli Knesset and the whoever Palestinian Authority is repealable, is something that can be repealed. So that's a veto power that can be repealed is quite a weak veto power.
Well, it says in the event of changes in governments, this
What do you mean changes in
legislation. So we give the veto power to a government. We do not give it to governments that have not yet exist. If there is a new government, we have, and that would be part of our discussion as the parliament for the people of Israel and Palestine, who to give the veto power to. But we don't want to be stuck giving a veto power to a government that is no longer exists.
I still don't understand. Suppose there have been parliamentary elections in Israel, and a new Knesset is seated, and a new coalition government is formed with a new prime minister and ministers and all that. Now, does that constitute a new government such that the veto power that was given to the previous government is suddenly annulled?
The veto power is given specifically regarding legislation, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So if we want to pass legislation and the new Israeli government is not relevant to the legislation, we don't violate its sovereignty, then we don't have to give the new Israeli or Palestinian government veto power.
I don't understand. So that means that because governments change every so often, that really means that the veto power is very short term indeed.
No, it's not.
In effect, there is no veto power.
It's not short term indeed. It is directly related to legislation that we are intending to pass. The veto power is given to the government over legislation that we intend to pass.
Okay, now suppose it's vetoed. The government of Israel or the government of Palestine vetoed your legislation.
Mm-hmm.
And so the legislation has not come into effect. But now there's a change of government, either in Israel or in Palestine. And what you're saying is that
yes, we can bring that legislation again and give the new government a veto power again. Yes.
Oh, I see. Oh, so the new government will have.
So, Joseph, I think maybe Mr. Nevo is trying to say, does this grant it just to existing government in power? It's to the government in general, whether different parties or anything.
The veto is not about the government. The veto is about the legislation. Okay. Once the legislation passes, then the governments do not have the power anymore to withdraw the legislation. It's related to the legislation, not to the government. Okay? Whoever happened to be the government at the time the legislation passes, we will do our own assessment to decide whether, first of all, to give them a veto power. Can we pass the legislation? Can we implement the legislation without giving them a veto power? If we can pass the legislation, in other words, are they dispensable or indispensable? If they are indispensable, at the time the legislation passes, then we give them a veto power. If they are dispensable, there is no point in giving them a veto power.
I don't understand that. I don't understand. I don't understand what you mean by dispensable or indispensable. Either you give the government a veto power, and that power has to rest with the government, or you
Okay.
play with it, or you don't give it.
I'll explain the difference. Let's say we pass legislation for a budget, for our own budget. The government of Israel and the Palestinian governments are dispensable on that issue. We don't need their authorization.
How come you don't need to pass a budget? You have to levy taxes on the citizens of Israel and of Palestine.
Now you're changing the legislation.
No, I'm not changing that. Without levying taxes, you don't have a budget. But on what authority are you going to levy the taxes? Especially if the Israeli government say the Palestinian government vetoes it.
Okay, so if we want to levy taxes on the people of Israel and Palestine, then the government of Israel and the Palestinian governments are indispensable, and we give them a veto power.
So give me an example where they are not indispensable.
If, let's say, we want to obtain funding from other governments, we want to get grants from other governments, the Israeli government and the Palestinian governments are dispensable. We don't need to give them authority.
Well, that could be a political question, but
no, it's a practical question. It's not a political question.
Well, okay, that was my question.
All right.
That's the question here, because a moment ago, someone said that Hamas could be the government in Gaza. It seems to me that if Hamas is the government in Gaza, the people there will never get to vote. They haven't gotten to vote since 2007. Why would they get to vote for you? I mean, once you leave Hamas in power, this whole thing doesn't make any sense.
We didn't say we are leaving anybody in power.
Well, but you said the government of Gaza, and then I don't remember who mentioned it, that Hamas would be the government, or could be the government of Gaza.
Right.
How could the whole voting thing work? If you have,
we are an independent and separate government from all the governments, including.
Yes, but you have elections. You said Palestinians get to vote. They don't get to vote if Hamas is in power. They never have.
And
Okay.
of course, if we bring
so you're basically saying that if Hamas is in power, the Palestinian government, but the Palestinian people in Gaza will not get to vote.
Exactly.
Okay. And we believe that they will be able to vote because the voting will take place by using computers, using the internet, using the phones, and people will be able to use those services, and the elections will not take one day, they will take several months. And so
I just feel that anybody who votes against Hamas having the power will be assassinated.
Okay, I mean, that's the question of democracy. That was the question that rose when people suggested democracy over the king or over authoritarian. You basically saying the authority is the authority, and that's it. there is
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not talking illegally at all. I'm not talking about politics or legality. I'm talking about practicality.
practicality.
Yes, that the Palestinians have not been given the ability to vote, and I don't know how if they are unable to vote for their own governments, they're going to be able to vote for this government, or that their governments will have any authority in vetoing what your government does.
Okay.
This is the problem. If they
All right, you are tying. Okay, first of all, do you have questions regarding this legislation? These are comments.
My question was, are you assuming that Hamas can remain in power while the Confederation comes into existence? That's my question.
We're not making any of those assumptions.
So you're assuming it cannot remain in power?
But I said, we are not making any assumptions about other governments. We are a separate, independent federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine. As far as we are concerned, if there was no Israeli government or Hamas government or PA government, our lives would be much, much easier. However, whatever government exists, we will try to deal with them in a federally, under the federal constitution. Any other questions?
I have a comment, can I?
No, wait, no, we have a lot of business to do. All right, let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on this legislation.
I had a question.
What's your question?
As a member of Gaza City Palestinian representative, is the votes secret ballot? I understood the votes are secret ballot for the members of Gaza. Is that true?
No, you vote online and you choose whoever you want to be your president in parliament, and you vote.
But
using your computer and using your parliament, so it's a secret from others, but it's confidential. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the point. If it's a secret ballot,
it's confidential. Yes.
Yeah,
but it's not secret. The results will be known.
Then well, secret meaning the final result will be secret. Your personal ballot would be secret. Therefore, that removes the fear factor from Hamas. That's my point.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So on the veto power, Palestinian parliament members published the results. 91% of the Palestinian parliament members voted to give veto power. Let's have the Israeli parliament members please vote. Okay, publish the results. 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation to give veto power. So we are now going into another legislation, and that's a police force. Common police force, and that goes into the question of enforcement that someone asked. Libby, could you please read the legislation?
Common police force, equal number of Israeli and Palestinians at each level. Distinct uniforms for the common police force different from the Israeli and Palestinian police force, independent of the Israeli and Palestinian security forces, in cooperation with the separate Israeli and Palestinian authorities. Address sensitive religious, cultural, and language requirements. Facilitate the operation of the joint economic zones. Investigate corruption by administrators who refuse to teach tolerance. Investigate allegations of intolerance and racist hate crime against Israelis or Palestinians. Assist in managing checkpoints. Guard the parliament building and threats against members of the Confederation. Facilitate access to and safety of religious facilities. We hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and Hamas. We bestow upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
All right. Does anyone have any questions before we go to our expert? I see two hands raised. Can see who you are. Please ask your question. Sorry.
It's Professor Nevo and Professor Sternfeld.
Okay, Professor Nevo, do you have any questions regarding this or comments regarding this legislation?
I have a question that goes back to a question I had earlier. Establishing a police force, like establishing any other government agency, requires more than a parliamentary decision. It requires a governmental apparatus. And it is not clear to me how you establish that governmental machinery, by what budget, by what, how do you pay salaries to the personnel? So far we have dealt with a very general framework, but this does not deal with the practicalities of setting up a government, especially a government that presumes in one form or another to replace the existing governments. So here's my question: how do you establish all this beyond the mere parliamentary decision that is before us now? How is all this to be put into practice?
Okay, first of all, let me correct you. We are not undermining the Israeli or the Palestinian government. We do not want to replace them. We, in fact, give them a veto power. The question that you ask is a technical question, okay? It doesn't deal with the big picture. Now, the real question that you're asking is about a budget. How are you going to get the money to do that? That's really the essence of your question, because if we have the money that to do it, then we can establish the police force. And we have legislation on that. But we believe that if we have 5 million people voting, we will be able to obtain the budget to do that. We will be going to the international community, to the United Nations, to the United States, to Germany, England, France, and all the nations of the world, and to the World Bank, including Arab nations, and seek a budget to help us implement our projects, including a police force.
So what you're saying is that this will be a foreign budget. It will be a budget that is bankrolled by foreign powers.
It may, yes. Just like Israel is being, the budget of Israel military has been always substantially maintained by foreign powers.
Well, it's not quite analogous, because I say again, running a government.
But to answer your question, yes, that's one possibility. There is other possibilities of generating revenues.
Okay. I've asked the question.
Yeah, I mean, we don't see anything wrong with using the facilities of other governments to give us funding, including the World Bank, to create a police force that comply with our legislation. Okay, any other questions?
Professor Sternfeld has a question. Okay,
Professor Sternfeld.
First of all, let me point to the fact that an establishment of this police force would undermine the sovereignty of either entity, and therefore most likely will be vetoed. I do believe that a common police force and a central bank are essential to the success of such project, but the first thing in order should be a proposal to grant statehood to Palestine in order to level the field. This is the necessary first step in order to create a joint police force and a central bank.
Okay, we are not precluding the Israeli and the Palestinian governments to establish two states. And we're not speaking about a central bank. We're speaking about the World Bank, and maybe I misspoke, the World Bank helping us enforce and giving us a budget.
No, I know that you were talking about the World Bank. I think that in order for the Confederacy to work, it must have a central bank to unify the economy and make sure that
okay, that may be. I am not an economist, so you probably have better understanding. But we could pass legislation on that. So let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote. Do you support an Israeli-Palestinian Confederation police force? Okay. Publish the vote. 92% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Do you support an Israeli-Palestinian Confederation police force? Israeli parliament member. Okay, publish the votes. 88% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the president of Palestine, the Palestinian president. Do you veto this legislation?
I don't veto it. I just doubt, well, when are you planning this election? Just to get an idea, because it's totally utopic.
The election has already been conducted. I am the president.
Okay, and it's a beautiful utopia. I love it. But what is the time frame?
We are acting this out in the assumption. Okay, you are the president of Palestine. Are you going to veto this legislation?
No, I welcome it.
Okay, let's go to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation?
Yes, I'm vetoing it. It is a complete violation of our sovereignty. However, I might change my mind if I get very special guarantees that I have complete control on the recruitment of all the forces. I know exactly who is a member of the police force, how they're recruited. I also want complete oversight of procurement of all the material, be able to veto any material I do not approve of. I also willing to offer money for this thing as long as I have control on how this money is spent.
Well, under the Constitution, the police force is under the jurisdiction of the Vice President of the federal government.
That's fine. As long as I can control and I can check on the decisions of the IPC in respect of this police force, I would be willing to envisage it as long as I keep some control on how this is happening, and I don't end with some uncontrolled force that's on my territory. I want to know what's going on.
All right, so Mr. Prime Minister, our purpose is not to undermine you or your government. We want to work together with you. And I think that a lot of what the conditions that you imposed probably would be acceptable. So you're demonstrating to us how this common police force legislation could pass. So thank you so much. We're not gonna deal with every issue that you raised. The purpose is to just demonstrate to the public to the people in this simulation and how this thing will work. So let's go to the next legislation. Okay, the next legislation is removal.
I'm happy to lift my veto as long as all those things are approved and agreed on. That's the point.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Next legislation, removal of the wall, barriers, and checkpoints between Palestine and Israel. Libby, could you please read the legislation?
The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation is calling for the Israeli government to promptly remove the wall, fences, barriers, and all checkpoints scattered across the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. We hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and Hamas, bestowing upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
All right, let's have the, does anyone have any questions regarding this legislation? Okay, hearing no questions. Professor
There's two people with their hands up, but I think that they've left their hands up from before. That's Professor Nevo and.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you, Professor Nevo, do you have any questions regarding this legislation?
No, I
Okay.
don't. I didn't ask.
Professor Sternfeld? Lior Sternfeld?
I don't have any questions.
Okay, let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on this legislation. Publish the vote. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members voted on this legislation. And let's have the Israeli Prime Minister, parliament members please vote. Okay, publish the votes. 88% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. I'm going to go first to the president of Palestine. Are you going to veto this legislation?
I'm not going to veto it. I just ask how, I mean, we have to be a tiny bit realistic with our beautiful Ethiopia, because I cannot imagine Israeli. We are here probably all leftists.
You need to play. You need to play alone.
Take the wall away. It's impossible.
You're not going to veto
impossible.
this? All right. Let's go to the Israeli Prime Minister. Given the fact that it's been proven that the wall doesn't give Israel any security, and in fact provided the impression that they have security, are you going to veto this legislation?
I am vetoing it. Absolutely, yes. And I'll keep the veto until I see a realistic path towards a more secure arrangement between Israel and the Palestinians. So under the present circumstances, my veto is absolute.
Okay. So I am the president of the whole area, Israel, Palestine. I am going to work worldwide and in Israel to explain to the people of Israel and Palestine that you are not acting in their benefit, because it has been proven that the wall does not give security to Israel. In fact, the wall has provided less security and provided the people near the wall the impression that the wall gives them security when it did not. So I will work with you, Mr. Prime Minister, to change your mind, but if you do not, then I will work against you within the Israeli and the worldwide community to see to it that we will have a new government.
I welcome all dialogue.
All right, thank you. All right, so I think that you got the picture, the audience. Let's go to, okay, we don't have much time for more legislation, so I am going to have the survey. After participating in the simulation, do you support a common federal government for the people of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza? Please vote now. I think You got the picture. Do you support the federal government? Okay, so 92%, 24 out of 26. Share the results, please. 24 out of 26 voted yes. And 2 out of 26 voted no. So in fact, the direction of no went up by one person. All right, so now let me just have closing remarks. I believe that a common federal government can bring peace. We can do the online election. Just want to remind you that $100 million is a drop in the bucket. Israel, Palestine spend $3 billion, I believe, every week for the ongoing war. $100 million could change and make peace. And I have disagreement with Professor Nevo about the legitimacy of Israel, Palestine, the governments, but I don't believe they are legitimate because they are not elected by the people of Israel. And we need a federal, common, legitimate government in Israel, Palestine. This is what $100 million could buy you, or it could, in my opinion, make peace for the people of Israel and Palestine. I'm going to stop sharing. And let's just open up now for discussion. All right. Professor Nevo or Isaac, do you have any comments?
Yes, I'll make a few comments. I actually, sitting through this, I found myself in an uncomfortable position. I actually support the idea of an Israeli-Palestinian confederation, an idea that has been promoted by an Israeli group called A Land for All. It's an idea for a confederation, which it presupposes the two-state solution. So it presupposes that there will be a Palestinian state, and the two state entities would enter into a confederal arrangement. The group A Land for All has various specifications on how this is going to work. And in fact, I support it. I sat through this discussion and I found myself discussing, as I already understood from my previous engagement with you, Joseph, that the proposal here is not for a confederation, but for a federation, which is a variation of the one-state solution, which is something that I find to be entirely utopian, as someone has said here, and unresponsive to the needs of, I believe, both peoples in Palestine, the Jews and the Palestinians, for a government that reflects their national aspirations. During this discussion, I raised various objections and skeptical questions, because, for two things. One, because I do support a confederation of two independent states. And two, because I think that the assumptions that you have made embody an attempt to either disregard or delegitimize the existing governments. Not that they don't have many problems, they do, but I don't believe that a political path forward could be hoped for by completely disregarding their existence, as this proposal in effect does. Even the veto power is really made conditional. These were my reservations. Perhaps if you had stayed with your original idea of a confederation, I could warm up to it a little bit more than I have. But I believe that the path forward is not through this idea, but through political activity and movement within the communities of Israelis and Palestinians to make the idea of a confederation, a confederation between two independent states more popular and understandable by both populations. So that's my view.
Oh, yeah, but you pointed out that there is no Palestinian government.
Right,
And
there
I
should
will
be
point.
establishment.
I'm sorry?
Right, and there should be established. It should be established, and it should be established within a more general program of setting up confederal arrangements and confederal institutions by agreement between these two sides. I don't think you can you can get around the need to get the agreement of the populations in question in their respective institutions that have been developed over many years. And I think that part of your programs, to simply disregard them, is unworkable.
Okay, let's go to Shlomo to ask a question. Shlomo, please. And then Una, and then Charles.
Sorry. Replying to Dr. Nevo, yes, it is utopia, but the two states.
I can't hear. I don't hear well.
I'm sorry.
Could you repeat?
Right. You're right about the utopia. Oh, maybe I'm no. You're right about the utopia, but the two-state solution is also utopia, and it is much dangerous utopia because it gives the feeling that but there is a solution just waiting around the corner. No, it is not. And because it is waiting around the corner, we are all waiting for it. So the idea here is to start something, whatever happen at the end. And if there will be if we will end up with two states, great. We still can have this confederation and even a better one. But meanwhile, we don't have it. We do have this meeting of people, Israelis, Palestinians, people from all over the world, and with the understanding that we have to create something that is in common to us. So that's number one. Number two, I regret Nancy left because she raised a good question. She said there is a dictatorship there with Hamas and all of that. I think in Israel there is no democracy either. And right nowadays you cannot say in Israel that you want to even ceasefire and you want to stop the war. It is, So, anyway, so that Nancy is no longer here, unfortunately, but whoever thought that she is right. And those are my main comments. And I just hope that Dr. Nevo will somehow agree to participate in this, because that's the only, it's not a solution, but it is a way to a solution or a way to go forward. Otherwise, we are stuck. Thank you.
All right, Isaac, you want to respond to Shlomo, or shall we go to the next person?
With just a few words, it is true that the two-state solution is very far off, but this only places a responsibility on peace-loving people to try to convince the populations in question that this would be a viable solution, a peaceful solution, and one that respects the national aspirations of most of the people of both peoples, because both peoples are very much
What prevents the federal government from creating a two-state? In fact, it is much more likely that the federal government will create the two-state than the failed Israeli and Palestinian governments that for 75 years not only did not create two states, but created more violence and went opposite the two-state. The two-state, you have to acknowledge reality. You say this is utopia, but the two-state had been voted in 1947. It's been proven to be a failed system.
But the idea that you can, that the hypothetical federal government that you are hypothetically establishing could enforce a two-state solution, that from the outside, so to speak, without speaking to the publics of these two populations.
To the contrary, Isaac, we are not from the outside. We are the inside. We are the people of Israel, Palestine, who were elected. In fact, the Israeli government and the Palestinian governments are not elected by the people of Israel and Palestine. It would be a lot more legitimate if Palestinian parliament members and Israeli parliament members who are elected in the area vote for a two-state rather than a two-state imposed by the United States.
Well, I don't want to repeat myself, but
okay,
the idea of
I apologize for interrupting.
Of an election conducted by this group with $100 million and so on and so forth, but without legal authority that is recognizable, or that is in fact recognized by the existing institutions, both the Israeli state and the Palestinian Authority, is an attempt to enforce a solution, by some abstract idea, rather than the political work that needs to be done. And the political work that needs to be done is to go to the Israeli public, to go to the Palestinian public, and to offer them an alternative, and hope for the success of this alternative through the political process. I don't think there's a way around that. I don't think any
Well,
solution...
that's exactly what we're doing. That's exactly what we're proposing.
No, I don't think so. I think that you could have come as a political party to the Israeli public and to the Palestinian public and propose this. And should a sufficient number of people be convinced of the advantages of your idea of a federation, then the political process will bring it about that the two communities will establish this federation. But
I would like to answer you to this point, if I may.
Sure.
Because if we create elections for this new kind of government, there will be people who want to candidate and there will be people who want to vote. So by voting, by presenting yourself as candidate, you already agree to this idea. It's just another way to bring it up. If we discuss this idea in the Knesset or with the existing Palestinian Authority, we will just turn in circles like it has been done for 70 years. We need the new kind of we need utopia. I want to come back to reality, like you said, you repeatedly say we have to face reality, because, okay, I think in reality, utopia is the only thing that has a chance. And by presenting yourself as candidate and by voting for these candidates, you already agree. You are already this public which is asked, do you agree with this idea? And then we have something like learning by doing. We are learning, developing within the process. We are not first developing, discussing ideas, struggling for power, so on. We are growing with the process, because, and I'm the second time I'm here with the simulation, and what I like is that we learn just by the problems that show up. We discussed this now long enough until we know enough to say, okay, now let's go collect the money and go do it. In this discussion, I want to raise a question about reality, because reality, I want to formulate a worst case thing. If we have, we are idealists here. We are people who believe in utopia, and I think it's the only way. But go to reality, who will present himself as a candidate? Probably very progressive people, leftists, idealists. And then who will vote for them? The same kind of people. And then, I mean, it's great. We need this kind of people with vision. But we have the majority in Israel. I'm sorry, I can repeat what you said before. Netanyahu is just as bad as Hamas. So we also have a dictatorship at the moment, if you ask me. So we will, with the current government of Israel, we will only get veto. We will not get anywhere. It's absolutely unrealistic that they agree on anything. And then and in case there is a tiny number of confederal police groups, they will finally protect the Palestinian interests. So it will be a step back for the Israeli power. So we only will have veto. I mean, I will love to continue working for this utopia. I will be back here, and I wish nothing more than peace in Palestine and Israel.
Thank you. Let's go to
what is the realistic part of it? We have even a UN ICJ vote, and Israel more or less behaves like, fuck you, we don't care, we kill even more than before. I mean, please explain me your time frame, or do Israelis first have to get more? I mean, yeah, it's like people are starving in Gaza, despite the ICJ rule. Where is the connection to reality?
Look, my connection to reality is that I believe that there's no way around the political process. We are facing a crisis right now in Gaza and the whole of Palestine. And it's a terrible war. And it is conducted with genocidal dimensions that will have terrible impact. Nevertheless, I believe that regarding stopping the war, regarding Israeli-Palestinian relations short of a confederation, and regarding the utopia of the confederation, there just is no way around the political process. You have to go to the streets, you have to demonstrate, you have to organize, you have to run for office. There's no way around the existing political process, and the ideas. Ideas may be utopian, and I'm a progressive person, and I also believe in utopia. But utopia has to be ultimately grounded in the perceptions and the willingness of the people, of the public, to be implemented. Otherwise, it just remains a utopia.
Yes,
let's go to Una, please, and then Charles, and then Guy, and then Giacomo, and Jay, Samir, Shlomo, and Lior. Lior will give you a priority. Go ahead.
Okay, quickly, because I know so many people are behind. First of all, Joseph, thank you very much for your dream and utopia. I'll go along with you as well. It is a simulation, let's not forget it. It took me a long, long time to understand that. Number one, merci, Joseph. Number two, I'm going to think aloud. You're all talking about the crisis. Totally right. But when did this crisis start? Not on the 7th of October. Please don't insult my intelligence. It started 75 fucking years ago because the world started to decide to, don't forget, Palestine invited the Jew from Europe to go to Palestine because we, the fucking French people, English, we didn't want the Jew on our territory. Therefore, please, can people start reading books about history, okay? Therefore, two-state solution, no. As far as I'm concerned, one state, equal rights. But Joseph's solution is also a good one. And I wish you well, Joseph.
Thank you, Una. Charles.
I hope you don't mind, Professor Nevo. I don't think you will. If I challenge your assumptions about the Land for All proposal, since you seem to believe that it's more grounded in reality than the IPC. The problem that I have with the Land for All proposal is that the two states that it presupposes will basically disenfranchise even more the Palestinians that exist within Israel and have the expectation that that somehow will increase the legitimacy that the people who exist in the territories will enjoy. The current situation with 700,000 settlers, all heavily armed, while Palestinians are prevented from having arms, the Palestinian Authority, which their only authority basically is to be the local cop on the beat for Israel. They don't control water. They don't control their own borders. They don't control who can come or go out of those areas in which they do have that limited autonomy. And to expect that somehow to pair them with the 20% of the people who exist within Israel is going to improve the situation in which, the current situation in which Israel basically has 100% of the political power and the military power and the economic power and the resources, control over resources. I just don't see that as being realistic. The reason that Oslo failed was because it was unjust. The situation that it wanted to create was unjust. It was widely perceived as being unjust by the people of Palestine, which is why 23 out of 24 deaths over the last, since 2005 until October 6th, being Palestinian, out of 4,000 deaths during that time, 23 out of 24, every 24 are Palestinian, and that was not a deterrent. That was not a deterrent for those people in Gaza who were experiencing the utmost of the injustice of their situation. Now, you can say terrorism, this, that, the other thing, but I just think people are human beings. And if they are subjected to a situation that they feel is unjust and intolerable, they will try to find a way around it or out of it. And until, Elon Pape said that until the international community and everybody confront the fact that this ongoing project of the nature of the Israeli state is what it is, there will be no solution. And I'm sorry, I just don't see Land for All being that.
Can I interject a response?
Yeah.
Well, look, a lot of your criticism and description, I agree with what you describe, relating to the existing situation in Israel-Palestine. You know, I couldn't agree with you more. Regarding Oslo, well, Oslo has not entirely failed, and it has not entirely failed because, in fact, it was the only process in over 100 years that left actual Palestinian institutions in Palestine. No other process, UN agreement, UN resolution, what have you, has managed to leave on the ground institutions that the Palestinians can call their own. I don't see that as a small accomplishment. But Oslo failed to the extent that it was assassinated by the Israeli side. The prime minister was assassinated precisely to derail the completion of Oslo. So I think Oslo, you know, it's a mixed bag, but I can't call it even today a complete failure. Regarding just one more sentence regarding the land for all proposal, it may have deficiencies. It may, you know, no proposal, as Joseph said, nothing is perfect, but I think it's a proposal that gives I don't know, a light at the end of the tunnel if enough people in Israel and Palestine will be willing to fight for it. It's a political.
All right, Lior, did you want to make comments? Lior Sternfeld, our guest, really.
Yeah, so I want to share, I share much of Isaac's sentiment. I want to say to Charles' point, to Charles' concerns, that as far as I understand it, a land for all doesn't revoke the Israeli citizenship from the Palestinian citizens of Israel. So they remained Israeli citizens in this scheme of land for all, and also it doesn't accept the current situation of the Palestinian Authority as the basic as the foundational situation for this confederacy, or so what land for all requires, and I think that Isaac will agree with me, is that first there must be an accepted statehood for Palestine as a precondition for the next phase of a land for all. And just to connect between your point, Joseph, and Isaac's point about the political process, if we accept the assumption that you presented, Joseph, that 2 million Israelis voted in these elections and 3 million Palestinians, if you ran this this hypothetical model in the general elections in Israel and 2 million people voted for it, it would become the biggest party in the Knesset by far. And obviously in the Palestinian parliament as well. And this would give the legitimacy that vis-a-vis international institutions, vis-a-vis the people, that right now the creation of this parliament and government doesn't get just from the voting in a separate election. I think that Isaac's point is 100% accurate. Do the political process. You believe that 2 million people will vote for you, run in the Israeli and Palestinian elections, and then get the legitimacy from the people to establish this federal government or confederal government or whatever.
All right, let's go to Guy.
Thank you. Yeah, I mostly agree with what the professor was saying, but I would like to speak a little, briefly about utopia and then reality. For me, utopia maximizes human rights. I think both the Jewish people and the Palestinian people deserve all human rights, and that includes self-determination. So if you're looking for utopic solution, for me, it's a two-state solution. In reality, how do you get sovereignty from Israel. How does Israel not agree to a two-state, but agrees to relinquish sovereignty, with sovereignty being the monopoly on violence? I'm not sure where in reality that world exists.
Israel doesn't have sovereignty in the West Bank and Gaza.
It has.
It rules by occupation. It doesn't have sovereignty, and its rule over there is illegitimate and should be opposed by all people of goodwill.
I oppose it. For the record, I want the occupation to end and for the Palestinian people to have their own self-determination and their own sovereignty. I'm not sure how the Jewish people give up sovereignty over themselves, not over another people, which they should immediately.
Well, no, they shouldn't give up sovereignty over themselves. They should allow sovereignty for the Palestinians over the Palestinian states.
All right,
I'm sorry. That part was not directed at you. It's directed at the idea of a federacy versus a confederacy, where in a federation, Israel gives up. The first part,
No, I
where
agree.
to me utopia includes a two-state, and not in a utopia we would be a one-state and Jews would not have self-determination, nor would Palestinians. To me, utopia is a two-state. And in reality, really the only possible way forward, because if Israel will not give Palestinian sovereignty over themselves, which again, they should immediately, how will they give up their own sovereignty? This is my question, not to you, but to the Confederacy. And I would suggest that an hour fixing that video would be very useful, because it does, once we realize what's happening, feel like a bait and switch. So if you can just, add a little title that says it's not a confederation, it's a federation, I think that you will gain more legitimacy in the long run. That's again to the Confederation people.
Okay. Giacomo. Unmute.
Yeah, again, my comments concern federation, confederation, and so on. The way I see the IPC as apart from how the IPC would be formed and how do we hold these elections, which is of course a utopian vision at the moment, quite theoretical. But then what would the IPC be? What would it do? I would see it. I worked for years in Brussels with the EU, and so I'm maybe affected by my experience there. In the 1950s, the EU was created as a very limited agreement, intergovernmental agreement between some countries that agreed to pool certain very limited areas of their sovereignty with very strict controls on what the EU would do. And over the years, the model proved itself, and by now we got these giant steps towards actually a common currency and so on. So, but this happened very slowly. The EU is not a federation. I don't even know if it could be called a confederation, but these are words anyway. These are definitions. But the idea would be that I would see the IPC as a similar thing, as a process. We start, if it works, if it proves itself, if the quality of its political proposal is good, then if it serves a purpose in bringing together Israelis and Palestinians, some of the proposals that I've seen in the past here at the simulations was on a school curriculum. That's the sort of thing that perhaps more realistically could be one of the first building grounds, have common, even very boring things on intrastate trade, state trade between Israel and Palestine. So little steps towards building confidence and building trust in the IPC. That's the sort of thing that's needed. Then whether we, in the end, the end goal is a federation, a confederation, I think that it's a bit early to decide all this. And I would take it really step by step.
All right. Isaac, do you have a reply or?
Look, I think that what Giacomo was
Yeah, come on.
proposing is it's generally acceptable to me, because what he was proposing, by analogy with the European Union, is a political process that involves the powers to be, the powers currently existing. I don't know, the governments of France and Germany and a few other countries came to an agreement in the 1950s or whenever it was, and the agreement developed. And that's something we ought to emulate in Israel, Palestine. As a matter of fact, I think Oslo was a step in that direction, although it was, as I said, derailed by assassination. But that's the political process, and through that, proposals should develop, and I agree with that spirit.
Okay, so from what I understand from you, Isaac, is you say, well, you want the governments to agree on the creation of a federal or confederate system. That's my understanding from you. And my response to that is they had 75 years to do that. They created things a lot worse. And to give them the exclusivity to do that is in itself unrealistic.
But to deny their exclusivity is to propose an outside force to come and take control. And I believe that well, first of all, that force is not in existence. And secondly, it runs the risk of creating a different kind of injustice. And that is the injustice of setting up institutions that do not reflect the will of the people or the aspirations of the people. And that has its problems too. It's not, coming to.
We are proposing the opposite.
No, I don't think so.
We are proposing that the will of the people truly.
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think what you are proposing amounts to, although you may not acknowledge it, but what your proposal amounts to is setting up a government to replace the existing institutions or to subordinate them to the institutions that you are hypothesizing. And I think that is not, I think that is not a peaceful solution. That is a solution that will actually engender the opposition or the wrath of the existing powers. And it is also not a democratic.
You had legitimacy in saying what you're saying if there was no 75 years of constant violence and wars, and to say that your model is a peaceful model for the existing governments that have failed and have given so much death and destruction, and to say, well, we need to have these same people as the existing model to follow and to give them legitimacy, to me sounds
Joseph, ask yourself how many years of strife, conflict, wars, world wars Europe had to endure before the governments of the, what was it, EEC, have managed to agree on a union, or before that on the European Community and subsequently the Union.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you, except that we now have the mechanism, we have the internet, and we can create a common federal government. We don't have to live in the 19th century.
Yeah, but you
That's
don't
what you are
create governments.
proposing.
I would
Let's
also
go
like to
through.
say something about this.
Let's go through the 18th century, the 19th century. Let's kill each other for another 200 or 300 years until we come to our senses.
You don't create governments by internet. This is,
Well, that's what they said about not creating a democracy by paper election. You can throw the paper, you can tear it up. That's what they argued against paper elections when it came as an idea.
Okay.
Nice.
Well,
I
would like to make one
about
comment. I would like to make one comment about the EU. The EU does not have an army. That is why the EU is not a country. If you do not impose with violence your will, you will not have a country. The IPC cannot be a federation because it is not imposing its will by force. It is doing it with popular participation, but this cannot result in a state organization. It can only be a loose agreement between countries to accept joint sovereignty in some areas, and that's
let's go to Jay.
aiming at.
Let's go to Jay. Jay.
Just briefly about Scotland, seems to be on the path of some kind of a working relationship with England and the British after many, many, many years. The concept that Ingelborg was mentioning, saying that we have to have a wide open opinion and a supportive opinion regarding the utopia idea is very, very legitimate, because that sets a goal post, a goal structure. The idea is that you don't do anything particularly overnight, that these things, as Giacomo explained, takes many times decades to evolve into a working relationship. You could start out in a very small, minimal beginning steps. You start building with minor building blocks. You grow into it. Time goes by. People accept. You find the small successes, whether I would argue that the trade between Palestine and Israel is the very first step, personally, because the building blocks is the economic relationships, and we go on from there. I think that's an excellent path.
That's a political path.
Okay, Samir.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Hi, Joel. Yes, I am for one secular democratic state, but today I have a new solution, and I think that will be the most peaceful solution for the Jewish state and for the Jewish problem. Just let us go back in history and see that where the Israeli Jews came from to begin with. We see that they came from Europe, they came from Spain, they came from different Arab countries. Well, the Jews who lived in Spain, Andalusia, they lived for 800 years peacefully with the Arab Muslims. 800 years until 1492, when the Arabs and the Jews were kicked out of Spain. And where they went to? They went to Morocco, some to Tunisia, some to Egypt, some to Syria, some to Palestine, some to Iraq. Okay? Now, the other Israelis, which we call today, the Ashkenazi Jews, where they came from? They came from Europe, from Germany and Poland after the World War II. So these Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, where they come from originally? They came from the Russian steppe. That's back, hundreds of years back. Gradually, they immigrated to Europe from the Russian steppe. And that Russian steppe, what I'm talking about today, is south of Russia. And that is actually the Birojan, the Jewish Republic, which started in 1928, the Soviet era, and it was a Jewish republic where all Jews were living there. That's those Ashkenazi Jews after the Second World War, instead of actually either come back to liberate Germany from Nazism, come back to Germany or Poland, that's their home, or go back to Birojan, where they came from originally. They have really no business going to Palestine and occupy Palestine. So now, I mean, after 75 years, they invaded Palestine and they stole Palestine furnished, and they established their dream of the Zionist state of Israel. And they caused the Nakba, the catastrophe for the Palestinian people, killing more than 750,000 and displacing them all over in 1948. And that Nakba continued throughout 75 years until today. So to end all of that violence and everything, these, I mean, today, either, I mean, for Jews, all Jews in Israel and Palestinian, they agreed to live in one Palestinian secular democratic state, or they have the choice. There is the Jewish
Okay, Isaac,
state
what do you
still
think
there.
of that proposal?
Well, I mean, they can go there. They can go there today. I mean, now today, this Birojan is the Jewish state where, I mean, they can speak Yiddish, they can speak Hebrew, they can do whatever. It is a Jewish state, all Jews living there. And actually, in comparison today, 14
Very few Jews
people
lived in Birobidzhan even in real
let's
time.
have
I mean,
Isaac.
14
Isaac,
people.
can
No,
you?
no, no. Let me just continue that.
But Samir, you're giving us a history of the Jewish people from the beginning. We are.
Well, that's fine.
We are
Well,
half
we
an
have to go
hour
to the
past
beginning.
11.
Yeah, we don't
Well,
have time.
That's fine. I mean, I'm just gonna get to the conclusion that area, I mean, what we call, I mean, Jewish state, Birojan, has 14 people living in square kilometer. While I mean, comparing to occupied Palestine, you have 945 people living in square mile. So in reality, this Birojan can take all the Jews in the world. Actually, it's the size of Switzerland today.
Well, I suggest you create a simulation to advance your proposal.
Well,
yeah,
that's fine. But
let's have.
Yes.
Okay,
that
let's
is,
go.
I mean, the most
let's go back to
thing.
Okay, let's go to Shlomo. I'll give you. Let's have. You had a chance, Shlomo. We'll give you again, but Sumava.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Professor Avesar. So, yeah, I had a question. And after listening to this thing, and thanks to Professor Lior Sternfeld and Professor Isaac Nevo for your comments. So, I am aware with Professor Sternfeld's work, as I have read it, and he has dealt with the geopolitics of Middle East. So my question is basically like, do you think this what we are calling the Israel-Palestine Confederation would be possible if we do not like in this today's discussion we didn't consider the other Arab powers or even for say Iran, because as we know Palestine never had worked in its own alone, and it has always walked in the lines of Arab world and always in the union with Arab world. And even if the confederation comes into existence, this what we discussed, this confederation, so there are very few countries of Arab world or the Middle East who have diplomatic ties with Israel. And I believe there would be always interference and make the region more unstable. Like Israel is currently in a fight with almost all Middle Eastern countries, and even where it progressed through Abraham Accords, like those are almost now probably destroyed after the October 7 issue. So I just wanted to ask, like the conflict between Israel Palestine isn't like India and Pakistan, which I'm from India. It's not like India and Pakistan. It is more like a conflict between, Arab and Israel. And so without peace with Arab world and stability in the region, do you think this confederation or anything would be possible? So yeah, this was my question. I would be happy if Professor Sternfeld could answer this because he specializes in geopolitics. But I would also be happy like if Professor Nevo could also highlight some comments. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Lior, do you want to comment?
Yeah. Look, I think that the only situation that is not viable and not sustainable is the current status quo. I think that any other solution would be better than what we have right now. I don't think that I don't share the fears that Professor Nevo has about the one-state solution. I think that the Land for All program and the two-state solution is more right. Ironically, the war made it more possible. The current war made it more possible.
Are you aware that Land for All is proposing that there will be a border between Israel and Palestine in 1967 border?
Right, two states, yeah.
Yeah,
Two states
and are you seriously calling that a realistic option?
It's much more realistic than a one-state solution or a federal solution.
I know, but by itself,
altogether.
is that, do you see the Knesset voting for?
Not tomorrow. Not tomorrow.
Ever. Do you see a Knesset voting for a 1967 borders? That's because you're saying it's a realistic solution, and my question is, do you see the Israeli Knesset voting for Israel to have the 1967 border as its borders?
With a little help from our friends in the White House and a little bit of pressure, or perhaps more than just a little bit, serious pressure, this may come to the political table very soon now, as the war in Gaza winds up, and a solution, an international solution, is needed. So, as Lior said, actually the current conflict may make the two-state solution, never mind the confederation, but the two-state solution may make it a little bit more closer to reality, and that will, that nothing will come to fruition without political struggle. It has to be a political struggle. It has to have an international dimension. Has to have a dimension, a political dimension within the country, and on the Palestinian side as well. But that's politics.
Could you explain to me the logic that the October 7, 2003, how is that making the two-state solution more realistic?
Yeah, let me answer that, because I've been discussing that with many friends just recently. There are really three options for the conclusion of the Gaza war right now. It might take a few more months, but and a lot of suffering we might add, but the end game has only three options. Either there'll be a reestablishment of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, helped by the international community, the oil states, the Arab oil states, who will bankroll it, and a renewed Palestinian Authority will be established there. That's one option. That's the option that the Americans, the British, are militating for. So that's one option. It's opposed by the Israeli government, but the other two options are completely unpalatable. One is a military occupation, a military occupation of Gaza by Israel. Very few Israelis want it. Some do. Some right-wingers want to establish settlements in Gaza, but the Israeli public at large will reject it. But that's
wait. Isn't Israel already occupying Gaza?
By occupation here, I mean a complete, full occupation, running Gaza by Israeli military government and so on. That's certainly not the case. Right now, it's a transitional military phase. So that's the second option. It's it's unmanageable and unpalatable, and the Israeli public will not accept it. And the third option is that Israel withdraws from Gaza and leaves chaos there. And under this chaotic situation, Hamas will continue its government and will continue to rule Gaza and reestablish its military force there. So these are the three options. There are none other.
There is a fourth option too, and this is that Israel is destroying the ecology of the Gaza Strip completely. Now they started to flood the tunnels, and it's very obvious this causes an ecological catastrophe. It ruins the water system completely. They're destroying the fields. Who knows what they threw on them? So we have the chance to total devastation.
Look, I don't want to stand and defend the Israeli operations. I oppose them every day in a demonstration. But actually, what you're saying is not being conducted. There was an experiment; it failed, and it's not going on. But the fourth option.
How do you know it's not going on? Because I read differently. And I'm really scared about that because it creates a desert. It creates a forced migration and yeah.
Okay, but let's go on to, so you say there is a fourth option?
No, there's nowhere for the Palestinians to go, and whatever the Israelis do, at the end of the day, there will have to be some political structure there. And it will be either an Israeli occupation or a Hamas occupation or a Palestinian authority with international support. And once the Palestinian Authority, with international support and with money supplied by Saudi Arabia or Qatar or countries like that, then the option of moving on to a Palestinian state is on the cards. It's on the table.
Could there be another option, and that is the destruction of the government of Israel? Israel is a Jewish state.
How would that be an option?
Well,
how would that be an option in conclusion of the Gaza war? There might be political.
That could be not only in relation to the Gaza war. It could be in relation to the war in Lebanon, in relation to the internal dispute between the Israelis themselves, who are not supporting the government. And so there could be an internal collapse within the Israeli system, coupled with Israel's inability to maintain Gaza, coupled with Israel's inability to deal with the North, and coupled with the dismantlement of the Israeli government itself. We've seen that before. We've seen 5 elections before where Israel was on the brink of collapse without Gaza, without Lebanon.
Look, I don't think Israel is on the brink of collapse, and I don't think the military threats from Hezbollah in Lebanon amount to that.
Whether you think or not, is that a possibility that you take into consideration?
Okay, I don't think that the scenario that you have just outlined is realistic. If
For me, it's completely realistic.
Okay. But anyway, what I think is more realistic is that the Palestinian Authority will regain its control of Gaza with the support of the international community, and will be the basis for a Palestinian state as projected in Oslo. In fact, I hear that the British foreign minister and some people in the establishment, in the American establishment, are already thinking in those terms, thinking, for example, of recognizing a Palestinian state at the beginning of this process by going to the United Nations Security Council. And the Americans are considering lifting their veto on this. So, these things can happen, and they of course they will require political action within the Israeli public. It's not, nothing is guaranteed here, nothing is automatic, but I don't think it's unrealistic. I think it's a serious possibility, and
well, but to say what you, okay, let's have Nasir. Nasir, you haven't spoken yet.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Professor Isaac and Professor Lior. I wish we could have heard more from Professor Lior. So I was a little confused myself about the Confederation versus Federation. I've only missed probably a few weeks of this event, so I don't know when the transition took place, but I knew that the term Federation has only been used for the last few simulations.
Correct.
And I appreciate Professor Isaacs when he mentions land for all, because it's interesting how many times when we get guests here, especially guests who are grounded in the actual living of Palestine and Israel, they seem to be focused more on establishing the states and the institutions first before coming to a confederation, where our model, it's like, okay, let's deal with what we have right now. And to answer something that Sumova said, she said about what about the Arab states? The other Arab states, I think, would be more than happy for some kind of solution, because they kind of want to sweep the Palestinian-Israeli conflict under the carpet so they can go on with, building tall buildings in Riyadh and Dubai and stuff like that. And this was actually a failure because Israel thought that they could make these normalization deals bypassing the Palestinian issue. And I think October 7th showed that no, it's not going to work. So, and the other thing was when Dr. Isaacs, Professor Isaacs said that the thing about we should not undercut what Oslo did. And I'm a Palestinian from Jerusalem. My family, my kids, my wife all have Palestinian passports. Before Oslo, they would be citizens of nowhere. They were like basically stateless people. So we have a travel document now. We have an education ministry. We have a health ministry. And I remember what life was like in the West Bank before Oslo. It was an occupation. We did not have national institutions like for schools. It was a mess. I'm not saying it's a great situation now, but it did indeed start the foundation for those national institutions. And we cannot undermine those and say Oslo was a total failure, because for the day-to-day life for Palestinians, Oslo, I mean, go look at Ramallah in 1994, when I was like, a little bit younger. I remember what the streets, the garbage all over the place is. But today, Ramallah is a beautiful city, clean streets, and things are moving, sure, but there's still an occupation. And definitely what I agree with what Professor Isaac said was that it started the process, but the problem with Oslo is that the process turned into the solution. And it was sort of what I call political constipation. Like, we started it and then we just got stuck. And so I think that we should look at those. But this is something I think people here who participate in the Confederation and who want to see it, is that this issue keeps coming up. And it comes up that, is the Confederation start from the top to the bottom, or does it have to start from the national institutions, the national entities? Because for me as a Palestinian, I can't wait anymore. We need to draw a borderline, because if we continue for the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have 1.5 million Palestinians living, 1.5 million Israelis living in the West Bank, confiscating more land. Because right now, 4% of the land of the West Bank, that's where 80% of the settlers live. So a two-state solution with some kind of land swap where you get 80% of the Israeli settlers who move into Israel, that's 4% of the West Bank. This becomes more realistic than waiting while these settlers are expanding and expanding. And now they're expanding outside of Jericho, they're expanding outside of Hebron, they're going deep inside areas close to Jenin. And as for Palestinians, these type of programs where we don't have a line drawn in the sand, it's very dangerous for us, and we're very scared about it.
I agree 100% with everything you said.
I really
want to bring up here a question about, also in relation to what you said about settlers moving to Jenin and so on, is there is a lot of hidden agenda also. I'm something between hidden agenda and conspiracies or whatever. I mean, how do we consider, how do we deal with these hidden agendas? These settlers, as far as I have understood, are really very fanatic.
Well, but this is why the line has to be drawn. You see, for Palestinians, you see there's something called technical peace and then conceptual peace. Conceptual peace is the concept that let's learn how to live with each other, recognize each other. But technical peace is, when you have a law and drawn and you tell these settlers that for sure these areas will not be annexed by Israel, they will know that their efforts are futile. You know, because what's happening right now is any effort toward peace has to include two things: the end of violence, which includes this slaughter in Gaza, and the end of the occupation. If without these two things, nothing can be done. And then you can move forward, because what you have right now is you have these, like I said, these settlers, they do this, but why do they do it? Because they can get away with it. And because they know that their settlements will be provided with electricity, roads, and then Israel can finally focus on its security of its borders rather than thousands of soldiers protecting little areas where 100 Jews live in the West Bank, which is ridiculous. Which, you know, Israelis, if I was an Israeli, the first thing I would say to my government, why was the border of where all the population of Central Israel lives unprotected while you're protecting little settlements in the West Banks? You know,
that's exactly what Israelis are saying, and I also agree that the settlers are one of the biggest problems. So
they're the biggest problem.
Why can they
and not just that, but like, look at UNRWA. UNRWA is being defunded because they found 12 members that were affiliated with October 7th attack.
And now it's
Meanwhile,
four
12,
left.
but I can give you proof that 12 Knesset members were at a Jerusalem conference advocating and signing up a petition to retake Gaza, to establish settlements, and to set up what's called voluntary. So, and yet there's no call to let's unfund Israel, because this government, 12, including members of the Likud party, who is the majority in the Knesset, nothing is being said about that.
So that's what I mean.
Let's have Isaac and Lior make their final remarks. We need to move.
I have one thing to say. Joseph, let me just talk 1 minute. Okay, very quickly. First of all, imagine, Isaac, imagine IPC like this in the 19th century, or before the World War, the First World War, or even after the first. Imagine a body like this of people from all of these countries that were in war, that they are now talking and creating a new government outside of all of these countries that really care for the people. Now, maybe this would save Europe from a lot of bloodshed, all right? So that's number one, just something to think about. Another, very quickly, something to think about is that your model of let's go through the political process, this political process, right now, if you take a step back, the governments are the enemies of the people. Every government you look in there, almost every government, especially in the West, is not for the people, not by the people, for the, no. They are for the ones who make money. This is a big oligarchy, and that's the truth. Notice something interesting. You mentioned that the peace process, the Oslo, was assassinated. No, Rabin was assassinated. How come when Rabin was assassinated, then the whole process is being killed? How come the big assassin is a prime minister of Israel for all of these years, including now? So something to think about this conspiracy that is behind it. And number three, what we are doing is bypassing. It's bypassing this process, this so-called political process where elections, you know, let me remind you, Mark Twain, in the 19th century, he said something interesting. He said, if elections could change anything, could make a difference, they would not let us do it. Already in the 19th century. This is true today too. Notice nothing changes, only going worse and worse and worse. We are now in the middle of a genocide against the Palestinians, not only in Gaza, also in the West Bank, a slow one, a little one. So, and it's going on and on and on. There is something very, very wrong at the moment, and we need to do something to bypass it, to get out of the system. And now, we cannot work within the system. We have to get out of it. And that's what we are kind of very weakly trying to do. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Shlomo.
Can I just say why I'm against the two-state solution briefly?
Quick.
30 seconds. The two-state solution says we're different. We need to separate because we can't tolerate each other. All right. The only solution is going to be when people recognize we have more in common than we are different. The one single thread from the 19th century all the way to today in the Zionist project is that this is who we are. We deserve it all. We're going to take it all, regardless what it takes. We can say whatever we want to the international community, but politically, the facts on the ground, it's a march in one direction. Until that changes, nothing will change.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. All right, Professor Nevo and then Professor Sternfeld, Lior Sternfeld. If you can make some short
I was gonna say
comments, final comments, and then we need to conclude. We're almost 3 hours into.
I'll make a comment to an answer to the last comment. You know, I think it's morally the best if people could recognize the humanity of whoever is different from them, and set up a democracy, a common democracy, regardless of peoplehood and nationality and so on and so forth. However, people also have a need to, someone earlier called it self-determination. That's also right. And as a matter of fact, both Israelis and Palestinians are very keen on governments that reflect their national aspirations. And I just don't think you can get around it. You cannot, I don't think that this can be ignored, and that a political process that ignores this very fundamental fact about both Israeli nationality or Zionist nationality and Palestinian nationality is overlooked. You just cannot overlook it. And you have, if you want any realistic chance for your utopia, to come to terms with it, come to terms with the fact that both Israelis and Palestinians want governments or states that reflect their peoplehood, reflect their national aspiration. In this respect, you know, both Israelis and Palestinians are very different from, I don't know, the American public, who views themselves primarily as individuals. Here you have communities who view themselves collectively as nationalities, and they will insist with all the force that they have on institutions that reflect their national aspirations. And so if you want to get peace, you have to come to terms with this. and find a way of these two nationalities to compromise over issues like land and other issues, so as to make the two-state solution possible. I will add, if you want, a word about Zionism. I would say this: Zionism is not a simple phenomenon. Its origins are in the untenable condition of Jewish communities across Europe and across the Middle East. And it offered those communities a nationhood that would give them a security that they did not have. The tragedy of Zionism is that the nationhood that Zionism offered Jews in their exilic condition could only be established under the British Empire by means of settler colonial instruments, with settler colonial values that were not originally there, but developed as Zionism developed. Now, this internal conflict within Zionism is the bread and butter of Israeli politics. That's what differentiates the Israeli left and the Israeli right. It's not, it's a conflict that is not and will not be easy to overcome. But again, you cannot overcome it internally in Israel, or as between Israelis and Palestinians, if you don't respect the needs of both populations for a political establishment that reflects their aspirations as a cultural and national collective. That's the reality as I see it. And that's why I believe you really have to operate from within, and you cannot come with an abstract formula and impose it via internet or something like that.
I agree with you, but as you said, it only took one right-wing settler to derail the peace process. And we have a large minority on both sides that seek the political definition that you state. I just see going for partition as a solution will be just another formula for violence, but that's just my opinion.
All right, Professor Sternfeld, do you have any comments to make?
I'll be very short because it's almost 10 p.m.
Yeah.
Look,
well, you're a young person. You don't stay awake after 10.
I'm not that young. Look, I think again, I see the ideal of Israel-Palestine becoming a one political unit in the future. But in order to form this one step, we need to solve trust issues between Israelis and Palestinians that run very deep in the history and the emotional state of each community. The way, and I will use here Pinsker's Auto-Emancipation booklet from 1882, that he said that the reason, the way that he analyzed the Judeophobia is because the Jews don't have, they are different from other nations. They don't have a place of their own, so they cannot be accepted as equals. And I think that this is where we are now with the Palestinians. In order to build this structure of trust, first we need to establish a Palestinian state, dissolve the fears, resolve the technical issues, and then we can move forward to whatever future might bring.
All right, thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Isaac
Nevo.
and Lior,
Thank
Professor
you,
Lior. Nice to
Lior
meet you guys.
Sternfeld. Thank you all for
Nice.
joining, and hope to see you in our next simulation. We have a lot of participation. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right.
Thank
See you, Joseph.
Okay,
Goodbye, goodbye, and thanks a lot.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, hi, Olivia. I haven't